Hello, we welcome you all to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with the hosts Bernhard Gunther and my wife Laura Matsu. In a previous podcast, the one before this one, we explored the mother wound. If you haven't checked that one out yet, make sure to give it a listen, because in this episode, we look into the father wound and how it shows up in both man and woman, and give you a psychospiritual healing guide. We'll discuss the main signs that you have a father wound from a psychological and spiritual perspective, how it can affect virtually all aspects of your life, and how to heal it psychospiritually. We'll discuss what we needed and need from our father and how the lack of a healthy male role model can show up in our lives. We'll talk about how we all have internal parents inside of us and how we can reparent ourselves to become whole and heal the father wound, as well as how to heal from the narcissistic parental image with practical tools and self-reflective questions. We'll also talk about how the father complex affects how we act towards authority figures and how it also affects our relationship to God. In the second hour, as always, there's a second hour. If you're not a member yet, you can access the second hour by going to my website, veilofreality.com, and sign up to a membership. You'll have access to all the second hours of over 135 podcasts now. And in that second hour, we'll explore the key masculine archetypes, which are essential for a man to achieve psychological wholeness, and how the masculine wound shows up in our current culture and society. And also how modern society has lost initiation rituals from boy to manhood and also girl to womanhood. We'll discuss how the negative father complex shows up in men and women on the left and right political spectrum. We'll also give you practical tips on how to do shadow work with your father wound. Furthermore, in the second hour, we'll explore Carl Jung's concept of the animus, which is the male part of the female psyche, and how it shows up in women if it's oppressed or when the woman becomes animus possessed. We'll also look into the 4 stages of animus, which is the internal male image that is projected by women on men, and how it relates to the men they attract and are attracted to. And we'll also discuss how animus relates to logos and the masculine principle of God. Lastly, we'll also give you helpful tools on how women can integrate their animus consciously to become whole. All right, before we dive into that, a very quick announcement. The most recent round of our 14-week group coaching program, Embodied Soul Awakening, is full, but we have the waiting list open. So go to the website, thetimeoftransition.com, to learn more about the program. You can sign up there to the waiting list, and we will notify you then whenever we know the new dates and start the new application and enrollment process. All right, so let's talk about the father wound, and let's start with maybe some signs of the father wound in women.
Yeah, so this is not a complete list. They're just some ideas I've written down from personal experience, from noticing it in people I work with. And I think the underlying one that we're most familiar with is, if you have a father wound, you're going to feel fundamentally insecure as a woman, which often shows up in seeking attention from men, especially emotionally unavailable men, especially men who are wounding in the same way that your father was. So we try to get love and attention from men in our lives that our father didn't give to us. And I would also argue, maybe you can clarify, that for men, it's pretty much the same, that they try and get love and attention and get from men in their lives what they didn't get from their father. Am I right?
Absolutely right, yes.
Yeah. And so this can really do a number on your relationships. If you're only seeking love and attention from men, then you're not also relating to them as individuals. You're only relating to them via what you can get from them. And it really affects the template of who you, like the type of men that you're attracted to. So if you have an abusive father wound and you don't heal that, you're going to be attracted to men who are abusive in an attempt to recreate that father relationship. And hopefully you can get the abusive guy to finally change and love you. So you're going to be on this endless task of needing, or desperately wanting and needing to get from men that which you haven't gotten from your father. And you will also choose men who will be very much like your father in many ways. That being said, important caveat is that to an extent, even if you got with a more safer guy who wasn't like your father, you'll still project your own father wounds onto that man because you are attempting to heal it. So there can be nuance there. It's not that it's always this case. Another big thing is that if you're a woman, you can become either extremely codependent, so extremely dependent on a man, or conversely, extremely independent. So you either desperately just need a relationship with a man, like it's like life for you, like you can't survive unless you're in a relationship. You might end up just going from relationship to relationship, or you act like you don't need one at all. So one of the main things with what the Jungians would call a complex, so if you have a negative father complex, is you either overdo it or you underdo it. So there's always extremes when you have a complex. And so you're either on one extreme of extreme codependency or extreme independence, like I don't need a man, period. Another thing is that you can get caught in cycles of love addiction. So the short-lived, intense relationship, often with men who are unavailable in some way, is a really big thing. Or you can just get caught up into other addictions like drugs, like food. A lot of this is just an attempt to fill a hole inside of you that was supposed to be filled with the secure, loving attachment of a parent figure. You can also tend to end up in relationships with men who are emotionally unavailable or controlling or share the same qualities that your father had, that were the most wounding to you. This is a really big thing, and we're going to go more into in the next hour, but you can become hyper-masculine yourself, which Jung would call animus possessed. So you would be harsh, cruel, living in your head, disconnected from your feelings, overly opinionated, overly argumentative. And this is basically the traits of a negative animus possession. Or you can be attracted to men who are like that too, because the animus can not only possess us, but it can also live on in our projections towards men. Poor boundaries, that's a really big one. So especially if you experienced abuse, which is a boundary violation, so any type of abuse, whether physical, sexual, emotional, whatever, if you experience that, then you go into life not believing that you have boundaries, not believing that you have a right to autonomy over your own body, having the right to say no. And then you'll accept poor behavior from men and others. You won't know how to say no. You'll become a people pleaser. You might not even know what your needs are to begin with. And you might think that, in order to be in a relationship with someone, I need to give them what they want. I need to do everything they say. I need to be everything that they want me to be. You can also become very demanding and needy when you're in a relationship, stemming from a deep fear of abandonment. So having a father who's not present in some way, whether he actually physically leaves or whether he's just emotionally not present, can create a really deep abandonment wound that people are going to leave you. And then that results in being very needy and demanding in a relationship because you're just driven by this fear. This is a really big one. And the last one that I'll note, although I'm sure there's many other ways it can show up, is that you can have a lot of trouble actualizing your purpose and your dreams in the world. So, you might have something that you always want to be doing, but you don't actually go after it. Or you might stay in a job or a situation in your life that's not fulfilling you because you don't feel that you're worthy to actually go after what you need because you're lacking that support that your father was meant to give you at a certain period. And then therefore you don't know how to support yourself. That's one end of the spectrum. But on the other end of the spectrum, you can become a hyperachiever, like a hyper workaholic, hyper independent woman yourself, and become very, very driven as a compensation Or maybe your own father was narcissistic and he taught you that in order to earn his love and validation, you needed to be successful in a certain way. So it can, again, be on two ends of the spectrum where you either have trouble actualizing your purpose or you basically become completely obsessed with it at the cost of your own inner life and your own inner feelings.
Yeah, similar. I mean, some of it overlaps as well for men. And also, I'm going to now go over some of the main signs of the father wound in man, which I would also note, and you haven't listened to the past podcast, listen to the mother wound as well, because they can also overlap, of course. But one of the big signs of the father wound in man is when the man or the adolescent is also consistently defensive. You know, when he makes a mistake or beats himself up, because it relates to feelings of inferiority and insecurity that a man with a father wound has deep inside.
Yeah,
right?
he's fundamentally insecure with his manhood, so he needs to defend it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I was going to note. Because he didn't have a mentor figure, not a role model, and we'll talk about this in more depth shortly. On the other side of the coin, he can also then put up a very strong mask or behavior to cover up this insecurity by being overly macho, overly independent, right? Very harsh, like hypermasculinity, so to speak. Similar to what the woman would experience as well with the father wound. Another sign of the father wound in man is that the man feels intimidated by other men, right? Feels always under threat, highly competitive, and has trouble actually making true friendships with men as well, like becoming good buddies. Another sign is very common that the man cannot communicate his needs directly anymore, right? This is a very big one as well. He most often doesn't even really know what his needs are. It ties into narcissistic wounding, and we'll talk about this as well with the narcissistic parents. And as I just mentioned, it can show up in hyper-competitiveness, even in non-competitive settings, that you always feel you need to be better, kind of like than others in order to make yourself feel better, whatever it may be. Always trying to prove yourself, right? This is the kind of guy who always has to have the one up in conversations, always trying to maybe crack jokes, always trying to draw the attention, always turns the topic on himself, right? This is also an aspect, again, of narcissistic wounding, or you become easy narcissistic with the father wound as well. He's also the wounded man, based on the father wound, is either physically or emotionally dependent on women in his life, right? That relates to what we talked about in the previous podcast of the mother wound and Carl Jung's concept of anima, the feminine aspect of man. If he is anima possessed, he actually becomes more emotionally dependent and physically dependent on the woman and can't function with her. Or he tends to jump from relationship to relationship. He can oftentimes have sex addictions, porn addictions, drug addictions, and all of that. Another way it shows up is the father wound is that the man can either be very actually highly driven in business, but again, similar to what Laura just shared, to the point of being a workaholic or completely aimless, just, wasting a lot of energy, just keeping himself busy, but not really accomplishing much. And shows up in moving from one job to another, never finishing things, never starting things, and just all over the place. And basically cannot really find his deeper purpose in life. Again, very similar to the father wound in women as well. It shows up in little to no capacity for true emotional connection to his relationships as well, right? It relates to the mother wound as well, but also comes through the father wound. And the man then usually has a history of unstable, often short-lived relationships. And most often the relationships he has are, the hallmark of them is trying to control women, or they can be overly controlling himself, or they are being controlled by women with quote-unquote controlling women who have become hyper-masculine, so to speak. They have been animus possessed, and the man who's anima possessed attracts these controlling women. And again, we'll talk about the animus in the second hour.
So I'll just add on to that. The reason he'll get with controlling women is because he's not holding a healthy masculine energy himself. So then the woman feels like then he has a woman basically play the masculine role for him.
Yes. And then exactly, and that ties into
or he becomes overly controlling himself. And you can see it's all like this kind of fragile connection to masculinity, basically.
It's a dance. It's almost like always swinging between two extremes.
Yeah, I think people tend to end up on one side of the other of the spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. Moreover, the father wound shows up in feeling numb or disconnected from his feelings as a man. In a relationship, he's also emotionally immature. Again, we talked about this, acts defensively frequently, is easily triggered, won't resolve issues in a healthy way, is very compulsive, overreactive, not very grounded, right, in any shape or form, so to speak. And that shows itself, again, in relationships as well. He can also be abusive or be disrespectful to others, especially if that's how his father was to him. But ties into what we're also going to explore, an overly knee-jerk, boyish, childish rejection of authority, right? For example, and not taking guidance and not even being able to take feedback or criticism or anything like that.
Yeah, which kind of leads me into how it shows up spiritually. So, not only you have to keep in mind, and we'll go into this more in the second hour, that we will project these qualities of our father wound onto men in our life, onto authority, and onto God. So those are the three main places. So for many people, they don't actually realize they have a father wound, but they have an extremely negative view of men in general. And that actually a signal of their projection. Or they have an extremely negative view of God in general. So this is actually a Freud concept, but Freud was an atheist, but you can turn your image of God into a projection of your father. So if your father was harsh, critical, abusive, we see God this way. If your father was not there, then you don't believe God is there. So there's a direct correlation between the way that you experienced your father and then later on how you experience God. So
in a sense, there's some truth in Freud's idea that God is most common consensus idea of God is covered or clouded by unconscious projections of the father wound onto God.
Yes.
However, he took it too far because he's an atheist. He thought all what God is the unconscious projection of the father.
Yes. I do think that it is greatly laced with that. So we have to realize that, our relationship with God, the way that we pray to God, the way that we even experience God can be in direct relationship with that father. And we can also turn away from God as a way of rejecting our father, of rebelling against our father. This is a really big way that I find it shows up, is that if you read like most spiritual text, whether it's Christian, whether it's coming from the Vedic tradition, they refer to God as a he, which they're referring to is the male aspect of the divine as consciousness. When I post quotes of people,
happened to me too,
yeah, I and it sucks because sometimes I even avoid it because even though it's an amazing quote, I can't deal with people sometimes who are like, "Oh my God, God's not a he," blah blah blah. They don't understand the male and female aspects of God. They won't accept it, And usually these are people who are railing on against the patriarchy. There's a direct correlation. So that kind of leads me to something I'll talk about more in the second hour, I believe. But this whole thing of we project onto what we see as the patriarchy as a response to our father wound. Most common thing. I've been through it. I've seen it many people. But basically, people get very triggered when they see spiritual texts refer to God as a he, to the point where they can no longer be objective with the information. They just get so caught up on that, which is a sign that it's a projection. If you can't look at something objectively, and you just get so emotional over it, there's something for you to look at.
I think we can address it right now because it's really important, the idea of this male aspect of God, and what people get very triggered when they talk his will or the Lord, and then women come up. But what about the goddess? We are also goddesses, and it's like almost this gender confusion which people project onto God. But really bringing it down to a basic definition, because the father also relates to logos, God, purpose. reason, word, and speech. That's what logos is, the Greek work from, right? And in Greek philosophy, it relates to universal divine reason, creative order, or the mind of God, right? Even the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. But here's somebody who, I want to read this quote briefly from M.P. Pandit, who was the secretary for Sri Aurobindo, in his book, The Teachings of Sri Aurobindo, from the Veda Hindu perspective, but beautifully describing both the masculine and feminine aspect of God. And here it goes. The supreme reality is one, indescribable. But when perceived as related to manifestation, it reveals itself as a being, an existent with a supreme consciousness. The consciousness is inherent. It is in fact the very nature of the being. From the immensity of the being, it manifests myriad names and forms, measures out finites from the depth of the infinite, shapes the many out of the one. The divine being and the consciousness force, the Purusha, soul, and the Shakti, are not two different separate realities. They are two statues of the same divine reality when it manifests. There's a mutuality in their relation, a oneness of being in the supreme truth. The divine being is the Lord, He who originates and presides. His consciousness force is she, the supreme Shakti, the executrix who holds in herself the truth of His creative poise and effectuates His intention. She manifests. He is the manifested. Without her, He is unmanifest. Without Him, she does not exist. This is a fundamental truth that governs the entire creation with whatever variations in form. The present creation has been brought into manifestation from out of the being of the Lord by His divine Shakti. She holds the truth to be manifested, releases them in her creative movement, and proceeds to work out their expression in accord with the will and the basis of the sanction of the Supreme Lord, His will.
So can you explain that in your own words to people?
Yeah, so it's basically that the masculine principle is the manifest, the creative principle is what projects out the creative impulse, and the Shakti, the feminine principle of creation, engages in the work of manifesting His will.
Yes.
Right. So that's how we also ties into even our own inner male and female. The feminine aspect is more associated with the creative principle,
with
right?
the earth too.
With the earth, and the male principle, more with logic, reason, kind of resides over it.
Yeah, matter and consciousness, basically. Matter being the female manifestation and consciousness being the male manifestation.
But it's nothing to do with gender or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. So basically the point is that a lot of our unhealed wounds towards our own father can obstruct our view of God and experience of God. As well as we've covered this in the mother wound, but the mother wound can also affect our relationship with the earth too, and the physical manifestation of the goddess. So let's talk about some of the really common core wounds of the father archetype.
Yeah.
Big one. I mean, number one, I agree for those who say that we live in a generally fatherless world. This is a product of the parenting of the ages that we grew up in, where up until very recently, fathers were generally uninvolved. Like, they went off to work, they came home, they read their newspaper. They weren't really expected through culture to take a super active role in raising the children. It was mainly to the mother. So this is why I think it's so prevalent, the father wound. And this is why I think we have so many complexes around he, men, the patriarchy, authority, because of the lack of healthy relationship with the father. And so this leads me to the first core wound, is abandonment. So one of the most common father wounds is when a father physically leaves the child's life, whether that's from divorce, whether that's from him getting remarried, whether that's from him just getting up and leaving. And if you have that, this can lead to a core belief that everyone will leave you eventually, which will lead you with a feeling of being very insecure in relationships, or having a pervasive sense of, I'm not good enough, everyone's going to leave me one day, I better perform in order to earn this person's love. So there can be deep-seated fears of abandonment, and also deep-seated fears of abandonment, I've realized, can make you stay in relationships that are wrong for you because you're afraid of just being alone.
Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment.
Yeah. So maybe we can just go, you can go.
Yeah. The next one ties kind of into it. Neglect, also a very big one, even when the father is physically present, but he's emotionally unavailable. And like Laura said, that's been almost the common way of raising a child, right? Back in the old days, there's almost a revival of this new regressive traditional way of very clear like roles of what the man or the woman is supposed to, or the mother is supposed to do and raise the child. But because of the emotional unavailability, especially of the father, the child will also feel invisible or unimportant, right? They can also lead to another core belief of not being worthy of love, which is then, again, as I mentioned before, stemming from low self-esteem, and can also show up as consistently needing validation, because that what the child didn't get from his parents, in this case the father, is then trying to get from others as he or she grows up, even through relationships or for work and jobs, always needing validation because of the core belief of not being worthy.
And the thing is that no amount of validation will also ever be enough, because there's still a part of you that believes you're not worthy of that. So, you can't, no matter how much validation you get externally, even if someone validates you all the time in the perfect ways that your father did, there's going to be a deep part of you who will not believe it.
Yes, that the hole cannot be filled by this external validation.
Yeah. Okay, criticism is a big core wound. So if your father, this is also a very common in narcissistic fathers, where they're overly critical of you, or, no matter what you do, it's never enough. And then that creates either a deep-seated fear of failure or not meeting expectations, and leads to ultimately a core belief that you need to be perfect, or you need to do certain things in relationships in order to be worthy of love. So you internalize that criticism, and then you develop this very strong inner critic where you could just blame yourself for everything that happens in a relationship. You feel like you need to please people in order to be loved, and you're not worthy of love just as you are. And that can be a really hard thing for someone who has been criticized to accept, because they believe that love is dependent on them presenting a certain self or doing certain things or achieving certain things. The idea that you're worthy of love just as you are is so alien to them. It's all based on performance.
The way this criticism wound can also show up is because you will have a very strong internal critic, but then it can also show up when you may become very overly critical with others constantly. Yeah. It's like your father working through you, so to speak. But that ties into the next wound as well, the conditional love, right? When love and affection depended on you acting or performing in a certain way that your father approved or didn't approve of. And then again, the child might grow up, or you may have grown up with the core belief that love must be earned. That reminds me of like even this notion of needing to be respected, right? I need to be respected. I need to be respected. Could also be because respect needs to be earned, but some people have this entitlement that I need to be respected. You don't respect me, comes from a father wound of this conditional love, of not showing true love.
Yeah, I think there's lots of ways that it can show up, that the idea that you need to look a certain way, you need to act a certain way, you need to be a certain way in order to earn love, that you're not fundamentally lovable just as you are.
Yeah.
Okay, controlling. So there can be a core belief around this, where if you have a father who's overly controlling, and he doesn't allow you to develop autonomy, meaning make your own decisions, make your own mistakes, you can either become overly rebellious as a way of maintaining your autonomy, including overly rebellious against authority and like, I'm just going to do what I want. And like, the father is really related astrologically to Saturn, which is like structure, order, boundaries. And yes, it is important to kind of rebel against a consensus for a period so that you can find out who you are. But I meet a lot of people, especially in the kind of work that we do, who rebel against their own best interests. they rebel against structure for the sake of rebelling. They're like rebels without a cause.
Yeah.
Like even if structure would help them, just the fact that someone else is telling them to do it, they rebel against it, even if it's good for them. So there's one way. You become overly rebellious if you have a controlling father. That's a way of maintaining your autonomy. So you're rebellious even in situations where it doesn't even serve you to be, but because you're desperately still trying to create your autonomy against your own father. Or there can be a total lack of self-confidence in your own decision-making. So you don't have any internal control. So you always need others to make decisions for you. And ultimately, the belief that you've developed is I can't trust myself or I can't trust others.
That reminds me, the controlling behavior of a father like this is not necessarily malevolent, but can be just based on good intention of a father always trying to help the child, overly bailing him out, making decisions for him, always pampering, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes almost an arrested development, like learned helplessness that doesn't help the child.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lack of mentoring, is meaning like the control and doing everything instead of mentoring the child to make decisions for himself or herself.
Yeah.
Yeah, another one is obviously emotional unavailability. We touched upon this. If even physically present, if the father is emotionally unreachable, it can leave children without the emotional support and mirroring their need to understand their own emotions, right? Which then oftentimes leads to suppressing their emotions and difficulty in expressing feelings. It's very common in men in general. Or the core belief that is developed that the feelings are bad, scary, unacceptable, and that relates to, again, the shadow, Carl Jung's work, and get shoved down into the shadow.
Yeah, another big one, role modeling of negative behaviors, that if a father has negative behaviors like substance abuse, is violent, cheats on his wife, it can then normalize these behaviors for the child, potentially leading them to replicate these patterns in their own lives. I think this is called identification with the offender. So especially if you're abused in a certain way, then one of the unconscious ways that we gain our own power back is that we become powerful like the person who abused us. Maybe you could just talk about the last two.
Yeah. So another one is favoritism, when the father shows clear favoritisms towards one sibling over another. We see this obviously with the mother wound as well. It can lead to feelings of inadequacy, jealousy, and resentment among children. And over-identification on the flip side, a father who lives vicariously through his child, pushing them into paths they don't want, but, almost living out the unconscious shadow or unfulfilled potential of the father. Right? And that can obviously stifle the child's identity development and leading to resentment, loss of self, loss of purpose, and they're not even living their own life, but the father's life.
Yeah, which leads me to, it kind of relates to narcissistic fathers and their impact. So this is unfortunately very common for many reasons. I personally have studied this from an evolutionary astrology perspective. And even though it can happen outside of this generation, one of the interesting things is that the Pluto and Leo generation, i.e. the baby boomers, one of the core wounds of Pluto and Leos is actually unhealthy narcissism. And my own theory of that is there's multiple reasons why it could happen, but I think a big reason why it happened is that there was so many kids in the family, there wasn't enough individual attention for the children, which then creates a core wound of like not being seen in them, and then creates a pattern of narcissism for the rest of their lives. So a lot of people are dealing with parents who are pretty self-absorbed to the point where they can't actually see, attune, and have empathy for another person. All they can do with their children is actually project onto them their own unmet needs and dreams and wishes. So unfortunately, when you have a narcissistic father, number one, you create a false self. So you believe that, or you not believe, you learn that in order to earn love, attention, validation, you need to become a certain person. You need to do certain things. And that can lead you very far from yourself. It can lead you into a life that is very far from anything that you actually desire and feel satisfied by. But then you also may attach your self-worth to what you can give to others. So you have trouble saying no to people. You might spread yourself very thin in relationships. You might overgive in relationships because you've learned that you have to earn love. And with this belief that when you unconsciously believe that love needs to be earned, you may be doing certain things for other people that you maybe don't even want to do deep down inside and you don't even realize it. You might end up in also a lot of one-sided relationships as a result. So you might feel very used and taken advantage of by people. You might be the kind of person who's always giving to your friends, and you actually don't feel like you're being given to back. Maybe you don't even express your needs back because you're always used to giving. Like, that's your default. And it actually might feel good in some way because that's what you've learned from your parents. It's like the same way when you have a narcissistic parent, you kind of have to adapt to their reality in order to get along with them. You know, if you start speaking from your own experience, often they turn the conversation on themselves. So it really becomes this deeply embedded pattern where you're just giving, feeling taken advantage of, used. You might be surrounded by people who you feel taken advantage of by. And you basically might overfunction in relationships by becoming a people pleaser, or you're always taking responsibility for things that go wrong in the relationship, but you never speak up for when you feel hurt or share your own needs. So if something goes wrong in a relationship, say that like you have a friend who's like always asking you for favors and you're always saying yes, and you never ask them for anything. And then finally one day you say no and they blow up on you. And then you apologize and you say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have made that boundary. But you take full responsibility for the situation and they don't even take any accountability themselves. These are these one-sided relationships that you can end up in. And so a lot of this stems from this belief that you're not lovable as you are, that you need to perform and you need to do things for other people in order to earn love. You might even be so cut off from your own needs that you don't even realize that you have any needs in a relationship. So it's really important, if that's you, one of the biggest things is to learn relational boundaries and to get to know yourselves again. Because having a narcissistic parent is really a boundary violation. Like, you're not allowed to develop your own identity, your own needs, your own wants. You are having to live up to what they project onto you. And then having this narcissistic parent can just cut you off from who you really are. And you may also find out that the person that you think you are is merely a bunch of people-pleasing coping mechanisms that you learned to earn love from the narcissistic parent. So it might take some work to get in touch with your own feelings again. Getting in touch with your own feelings will help you get in touch with your own needs again, your own wants, your own passions. So getting in touch with the feelings is really important because the feelings can be almost the internal guidance system. So, you know, if someone asks you for a favor and you don't want to do it, you need to be in touch with your own feelings in your body to know, I don't actually want to do this. And so, you know, this can be really hard when you have a narcissistic parent because you've been living up to this image that is not who you really are. So discovering yourself may be like discovering yourself for the first time again. It's like you're literally back to where you were as a child, where like you're discovering your likes, your dislikes, your wants, your needs for the first time. And you're learning not only what those wants and needs are, but you're learning that it's okay to be yourself, that the right people will love you for who you are. You don't need to perform for them. You don't need to do certain things to earn love. And that can be scary at first, I have to say. And it will also filter out people who have been taking advantage of you that whole time. So it can just be a really scary process to go through this, because if you are surrounded by kind of energy vampires who benefit from you overgiving and overfunctioning in relationships, once you start to choose yourself and start to speak up for your own needs, it will disrupt the kind of pattern that's running in the relationship. So you need to get in touch with your authentic self again. And that often involves getting in touch with your inner child. It often involves getting in touch with a part of you that's spontaneous. and then learning how to show that part of you so real love and real connection can emerge in your life.
Excellent. So for the father wounding and the narcissistic father image and all that, a lot of people are affected by that, a lot of men and women alike. But let's look into what we actually need from our father or needed, right? And obviously these needs can be met by our mother as well, but we want to direct them now to the father. And there are 4 of them. I'm going to go through them one by one, just to mention them real quick. Number 1, we need to be mentored. Number 2, we need to feel protected. Number 3, we need to feel capable. And number 4, we need to feel worthy. So we need to be mentored. This is very important, that the father's role is to guide the child, right? To develop the skills and capacities, to help the child to develop the skills and capacities to function in the world. This is very often missing nowadays, that results then in immaturity, in learned helplessness, in not being able to make decisions, not being able to face life maturely as an adult. So our father can help us manage our lives in the world, meet responsibilities and make good decisions, not making necessarily decisions for us, like I mentioned before, but helping to make us right decision, right? To kind of learn to take responsibility. And even when we fail, to learn how to deal with failure and just kind of like coach us, so to speak, in a way to prepare us for adult life, right? This also means he is actively engaged in helping us learn new things. And obviously the father needs patience to walk us through things and teach us new things without making us feeling discouraged or belittled or punishment or controlling and all of that, right? It's not about becoming a drill sergeant in the military. But because, very important, he needs to not do just things for us and help us too much. Otherwise, we can feel helpless. And we cannot really do things for ourselves anymore because everything is being done for us, as I mentioned before. But at the same time, the other side of the coin, the father also needs us not to help us too little. So we feel like always we have to do things alone and nobody's here to help us and to support us or anything like that. And we don't even know how to do things. And that can most often leave the child very overwhelmed and even insecure as well, right? And obviously for that to happen, then the father needs to have developed these skills in himself in order to teach them to us. He has to have the free time and patience to walk us through a task. So this is very important father role. This is most often neglected in this day and age, or especially in the past.
Yeah. Okay, so we need to feel protected. This is very important from our mother too. It's a real fundamental aspect of secure attachment as well, is that we need to feel safe around both our father and our mother. So if our parents are abusive, yelling, if they're addicted to drugs, or if they're just not present, or if they're dysregulated because of some stress in their lives, it's not possible. I also want to say that living in poverty too can feel very dangerous for a child, because while your parents are stressed about how we're going to feed the kids and how we're going to get food on the table, then that can also put the child in survival as well. But safety also means that the parent teaches us things like boundaries and how to say no. So you can see that if there's abuse in any way or form, there's automatically an absence of safety. And this safety will also teach us how to navigate the world in such a way that we know how to deal with harm. We know how to say no if someone oversteps our boundaries. So, if you have a father who oversteps your boundaries, either through just being a narcissist and projecting all sorts of ideas on you that are not who you are, or being abusive, or maybe he doesn't even know how to regulate his own emotions himself. If you're with an explosive father or even explosive mother, you will fundamentally not feel safe. So children really need an absence of this chaos and fighting in the house in order to feel safe. So if you have had a lack of safety, and if you had no boundaries allowed for you as a child, which can be as simple as like a parent just bursting into your room whenever they want to. I know I experienced that, but when that happens, like, a child is always going to be on edge. They're never going to know when they're going to get yelled at, when they're going to get punished. So if you have that, then this idea of boundaries can be completely alien to you. And you actually have to get in touch with your own needs and wants. Like, as I was saying earlier, get in touch with your feelings, know how to communicate those feelings in a healthy way. So you might need to learn all of this yourselves if you didn't feel protected.
Yeah, the number 3, we need to feel capable. That kind of ties into a little bit the first top. We need to be mentored. When we are properly mentored by our father, we automatically will feel capable. But what it really means that our father needs to believe in us and supports us in achieving our dreams. And then we believe in ourselves as well and have no issues really actualizing our purpose in the world. When our father is narcissistic, very self-involved, he may actually then project his own goals and his own unlived dreams onto us that are not our own. Then we may end up in jobs and even marriages and situations who do not reflect who we truly are. And we actually lose who we are, as we mentioned before, because we've built a false self based on this narcissistic projection or wounding. But our Father is here to be our support when we first go out and actualize in the world. He's meant to be there alongside us, letting us know we can do it, right? That's really the cheerleader almost, to cheer us and let us know that mistakes and missteps on our path are just learning opportunities. And this gives us a very important can-do spirit, right? Yes, you can do it, and gives us the will to go after what we want. And this capable of feeling the support really needs to come also from a psychological, emotional level. So if your father's already emotional aloof or dissociated, it will be hard to give because there needs to be a deeper connection. The support is not just financially of just giving the child just money and this kind of support, but what the child really needs is the psychological support to know that he or she can do it.
Well, it needs to be authentic. So the child needs to be really seen and attuned to in a way. So the father's support isn't just him going through the motions, but it's like catered to the child specifically. That's the main thing. Yeah. So this is something that can't be faked. And yeah, we need to feel worthy. So how our father treats us and how he treats also our mother, this is really key, then sets up the template for how we will expect to be treated in relationships as an adult. So this is especially apparent in daughters. So if our father has a poor relationship with our mother, children take that in and then expect unconsciously their own relationships to mirror similar patterns. Our father needs to have a healthy relationship, not only with us, but to our mother. And this sets us up for a healthy template on how we want to be treated. If our father didn't set a good example, then we need to create a healthier template of male-female relating within ourselves to get the love that we want. And you may have to undo a lot of our deeply embedded beliefs about relationships to get there. I just want to add on to that too, is that if the father has a poor relationship with our mother, but then has a good relationship with us, then often what I've seen happen in that dynamic is he's using the daughter to get his needs met that the mother is supposed to meet. And that can also happen vice versa too. The mother can also use the son to get her needs met, and that instead of the father getting the needs met. So for example, if the mother is emotionally unavailable in some way, and then the father gets a deeper emotional connection with the daughter than the mother, that's technically what's called emotional incest. But that also sets up a very strange dynamic as well, where it can get really complex. You can set up in situations where triangulating, you could get set up in situations where you're the other woman. It gets really twisted. But mainly, you need to realize that you internalize this template. It's very subconscious. And so you have to really be able to look at your relationship templates, your patterns in your relationships, your beliefs about relationships very clearly and honestly and with humility, mainly so that you can undo some of those deeply embedded beliefs and behaviors about relationships in order to get there. So I know for myself, I had parents who were divorced. They really hated each other. They were at each other's throats. Basically, I had to completely undo those patterns and then template into myself something that I never saw exist before, basically. Maybe in movies I saw it or something. But, you have to really be able to undo these patterns of relating to get the love that you want. And if you are in a relationship, especially when you notice yourself in the same relationships that have the same patterns over and over and over again, it's usually a good time to step back, to be single for a while if you can, and really dive deep into both attachment theory, relationship psychology, maybe work with a therapist for a while, because you basically need to completely retemplate how you are acting in relationships in order to get into a healthier relationship.
Excellent. So before we finish this first hour, let's look into healing the father wound and give you some tips and pointers and a self-reflective question, how to heal the father wound, psychologically and spiritually, all the different manifestations we just talked about. But obviously the first step is the awareness how your father has wounded you. So you can reflect back on everything we shared right now, because many of us have the father wound to varying degrees, just like the mother wound, right? And with this awareness, the most important part to engage in after it is the grieving process, right? Most often grieving the way your father didn't show up for you, or grieving the way in general, our parents didn't show up, for a lost childhood or for a childhood that wasn't really there, so to speak, and how it affected us negatively. So the grieving process is key. It's not, oftentimes you can prematurely go into forgiveness, but the inner child is hurt, it's wounded, it's sad, it's depressed, maybe even angry, right? So there needs to be a grieving process to go through on an emotional level to allow yourself to feel all feelings that have most likely been suppressed for many years. But speaking of anger, for a lot of people, instead of grief, there may be anger you're very pissed off at your father, right? That needs to find also an adequate outlet, obviously, before you can truly grieve, before you can go deep into sadness, because anger is always a surface emotion, so to speak. Underneath is sadness and grieving that needs to happen. And grieving the father you didn't have allows you essentially to open up to creating positive father template within you. That's how you reparent yourself. This is a very key point, right? You need to give yourself back that which you didn't receive from your father. Otherwise, you're always trying to get it unconsciously from outside situations, your job, your career, or relationships. And then you want to look at how this legacy lives on within you, based on the points we just shared above. Again, what are the ways your father wounds and shows up? So really be honest with yourself, contemplate, recapitulate, go back and see how this may have shown up, how you may have actually normalized it because you didn't know any better.
Yeah, and healing the father wound spiritually is your connection to logos, God, spirit, purpose, your mind, which is connected to logos and other men. So your connection to logos is your connection to power, thought, action. You want to reflect on what is your relationship to your own power. Do you feel like you have the ability to take action and direct the course of your life? What's your relationship to critical thinking and discernment? Maybe the reason that we have a lack of that is because we all have a huge father wound. And your own ability to discriminate information and find the deeper meaning behind it. I mean, honestly, like when you look at it in the world and the lack of critical thinking, the lack of discernment, the lack of even able to discriminate information and to understand the underlying meaning, you see that like there's total a lack of a father template, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see this all over the board. We're going to go this also deeper in this second hour.
Yeah, but let me just finish. What's your relationship to your purpose too? Do you feel like you are actualizing your deeper spiritual calling? Are you looking at other people to tell you what to do? So purpose is sometimes an elusive thing to people. So for many people with a father wound, they just want someone else to tell them what their purpose is. And if someone else could tell you what your purpose is, it wouldn't actually be your purpose. So they're looking for the father out there to just take the reins. But purpose is really an inward job because it involves you going within, discovering your passions, discovering your gifts, discovering what you feel truly inspired to do. And then the next step is actually guiding yourself in a practical action into actualizing those gifts in some way in the world. So you have to learn how to be the father you never had. Not only discover what the gifts that you have are, but then support yourself, guide yourself, encourage yourself, make sure you take action on what's most important to you. And that can be a discovery process too, is like, you know, you might need to try some different things out and not be discouraged that when it gets hard too. I find that a lot of people sometimes they like, when they have like a certain passion or purpose and they go after it, once it gets hard, they give up because they never had a father who supported them through their mistakes, through when it got hard, who supported them even when it got challenging. So like you can see the lack of the internal father's support within them, where if they come up against a roadblock, they collapse and they just stop and they give up.
It can also show up in really inability or fear of making decisions.
Yes.
Right? So you need to make decisions, even if it's wrong decisions, take responsibility, learn from it. But no decision is almost often way worse than making no decision, than making a wrong decision, excuse me. So which ties in the next point, that healing the father wound following that means taking responsibility for your life, for your relationships, your purpose, your work, like really getting out of victim blame and facing life as an adult with self-responsibility. It also means obviously developing healthy boundaries with yourself and your own time and energy as well. It means developing the will to do what you'll say you'll do and carry through on actions, right? It means living more in integrity. It means developing the discrimination faculties to know when you're wasting your time and energy on things that are not good for you and when it's more productive. Have a certain sense of discipline and focus and attention. These are all the masculine healthy principles that could have been damaged or not fully embodied if we have a father wound.
Yeah.
Right? We become more lax. We become more dysfunctional in that sense.
Yeah. So similar to what we did with the mother wound, we're also going to offer you a little reflective exercise you can just think about. But this is, I have to say, this is one of the primary ways I've healed both my mother and my father wound, is by using ideal father and mother images and then getting them to replace the ones that I have. So it takes some inner work to really discover how particularly your mother wound and your father wound, or your complex, the Jungians would say, shows up. So the awareness is really key. So for example, if you had a very critical father, when you really notice your own inner critic attacking you, you have to have the awareness to realize, oh, that's my negative father complex just beating me up again. And then what you can do is you use this ideal father exercise I'm about to give you to template a healthier way of relating to yourself when you make a mistake, when you mess up, or whatever's going on with you, to replace that. So you're almost like pattern interrupting it, and it takes some undoing. But one of the things I recommend to people first is, can you think of a father that you saw in a movie that you knew personally, maybe even a male teacher, a positive male figure who acted like an ideal father, meaning they were caring, protective, nurturing, supportive, whatever it is. You might have a different ideal father than the next person. So we need to also be able to think of an ideal father who's particularly suited to you and your own nature. So just take a moment and reflect on, even if it's like someone you met for a fraction of a second, even if it's someone you saw in a movie, or you can just make something up, but you want to really imagine that you had an ideal father. And thinking of that ideal father, how would he be with you? How would he be towards you that would make you feel especially safe and secure? So that father would be perfectly suited to you. He's the ideal father for you and your particular nature. So if you're artistic, he's going to be more artistic. If you're more into business, he's going to be more into business. So this is really the ideal father for you. And I want you to imagine yourself when you're a young child with this father. What would it be like to feel parented by this father? What would it feel like to go to this father for support, for guidance? What would it feel to go to this father when you need help actualizing your purpose in the world? And now I want to imagine that you're a bit older. So this point, maybe you're in your late teens, and you're really beginning to explore the world. Maybe you're a bit younger, but just you want to pick an age where you're really beginning to explore the world. And you want to imagine that your father is there, this ideal father, and he's there as your biggest fan. He's your biggest supporter. So he lets you explore, And even if you make mistakes, he still believes in you. He's still there to support you. So he really wants you to be strong and independent. He's not threatened in the ways that you're different to him. So he really supports your uniqueness. So I want you to imagine him giving you the perfect amount of support. So he's not doing everything for you and he's not doing nothing for you, but he's really there by your side. And notice how it feels to be supported by this ideal father. And imagine how you would feel getting this type of unconditional support. So how would you feel knowing that he's always in your corner cheering for you? And how would that feel at different ages in your life, at different monumental moments in your life, to have that support? So before you're about to launch a new project, to do something that's really important for you, even before you're about to get married or take on a new challenge, how would that feel to really internalize this feeling of having this ideal father? And really internalize this feeling and carry it with you. And if you ever need that support, if you're about to launch a project, if you're about to do something new, if you're about to do something scary that you're really passionate about, I want you to call on this ideal father figure and imagine what it would be like to have this internal support supporting you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the exercise. So that was the first hour. And as mentioned before, in the second hour, now we'll explore the key masculine archetypes, which are essential for man to achieve psychological wholeness, and also how the masculine wound shows up in our culture and society, loss of initiation rituals from boy to manhood and so forth. We'll discuss how the negative father complex shows up also in women and men on the left and the right political spectrum, including the truth movement, anarchism, and all of that. And we definitely dive deep then also into Carl Jung's concept of the animus, which is the male part of the female psyche and how it shows up in women if suppressed, or when the woman becomes anima possessed. And
Animus possessed,
excuse me. And then we've ties it to the 4 different stages of animus projection towards a man from a woman. And we give you pointers and guides in how to integrate the animus for the woman and also for men to really get more in touch with the healthy masculinity. If you're not a member yet, go to my website, veilofreality.com. You can sign up to the membership and then have access to all the second hours. We'll be right back. Thank you for listening.